You're listening to Estrogen Dropouts.
Hey, welcome back to Estrogen Dropouts. I'm one of your hosts, Erin.
And I'm your other host, Elizabeth. And so we often talk about how we are the sandwich generation. We care for our adult children and our senior parents. Well, today's guest is Sylvia Caravella. She owns Elevate Senior Placement Service. They help families navigate senior living options for their loved ones. And recently, she purchased Clover Hills Senior Living, which is a residential senior care home in New Jersey. She runs a fantastic blog on social media. She runs a fantastic blog as well as social media channels dedicated towards helping people find the right path for their aging parents. Welcome, Sylvia. We're so excited that you are joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's my first podcast ever, so it's exciting.
That's so awesome. We're glad to be the first one. So like Elizabeth said, I mean, especially Elizabeth and I have touched on being the sandwich generation and just the stresses that come along with when you're still caring for some children, maybe older teens, kids that are at college, and then your parents as well. I mean, how difficult that is because we're kind of doing both at the same time. And so many women in that situation, they feel a sense of guilt about bringing in outside help because we want to do it all. We've always been, conditioned and socialized to do everything ourselves. And so how does someone know when they have crossed the line from managing it themselves to needing professional home care or even in place care?
Sure. First, I'd like to kind of just start off by giving some just statistics on this caregiving crisis that we have, because to your point, every family that I speak to, guilt is the number one thing. And I just want to kind of share that this is a crisis. It's actually a caregiving crisis. The CDC has called this like a public health issue because basically there's 63 Americans who are caregiving. 63 million Americans are caregiving in the US. 70% of those are working. But for the first time ever, out of that portion that's working, we have 23 million that are caring for an elderly parent or loved one versus 21 million caring for children in preschool. So there's this shift that's already happening. And by 2030, there's been years of people turning 65 every day. 10,000 people have been turning 65 every single day. So by 2030, there's going to be this huge demographic shift. And by 2034, for the first time ever in the US, there's going to be more older adults versus children under 18. So there is going to be this crisis in the sense that even from healthcare providers and services, we need more people coming into this industry because these baby boomers are coming. They call it the silver tsunami. They're coming.
And they live longer. They're living much longer than...
So what's going to happen is you have people who are living longer with chronic conditions, and they need someone to take care of them. Someone has to caregive for them. So what happens when 70% of the people caregiving for them are still working? And it's also an employment crisis, right? Because I try to also reach out to employers back in the day when I was working in the city, there was help for moms. We needed, childcare, or, our companies would even have a daycare in the building. There was resources for us as working mothers or working parents. I don't see any resources coming along the way for folks who need to caregive for their elderly parents. What they're doing is they're taking leaves of absences, or, and I've seen it in my own family personally, where I've seen people quit their jobs so they can take care of their mom, take care of their dad, because there is this guilt, especially like I said, my background, I'm Hispanic, that huge generation, you never, in our countries, our parents live with us till the day they pass away. Nursing homes, I don't think they even exist. That's just not a concept, right? And then going to the term of nursing homes. Before I came into this industry, I had those same preconceived, nursing home bad. You put your parent there, you're a bad daughter, you're a bad son. But it's not just nursing homes, right? There's a whole other levels and tiers of service, of wonderful service that are available that people just don't get, right? So it starts with assisted living communities, right? So these are communities where someone goes not when they're sick, but they need help with their activities of daily living, whether that be bathing, toileting, mobility, dressing, grooming, all those things. And they need someone to help them with that so they can go to an assisted living community. Then there's people who get a diagnosis from some type of dementia, impairment, like Alzheimer's is an example. They would need something called a memory care facility. Those are different in the sense that they're kind of like an assisted living, but they're much smaller and they're also lockdown units, right? So people can't elope or run out of the building, which is sadly what happens. And then at the far, and then there's residential care homes, which is one that I own, which is basically like an assisted living, but it's in a home-like environment. These homes are super popular in California, Arizona, and Florida. They have thousands of them. On the East Coast where I'm at, not as much, but we're hoping to bring more. And then at the far end, the last resort is the nursing home. But that's the only concept people know. But the nursing home that's the hospital. That's when your parent or loved one, they need 24/7 skilled nursing, whether it's a feeding tube, it's, IVs. That's the last resort. So, but people just think, oh, nursing home, that's where you're putting your parent. No, if they're there, it's because they need to be there, because they need to be under 24/7 medical supervision, right? So it's now going back to the folks that need assistance with activities of daily living. If you're working or you're working from home, how are you being the best guardian to your parent or loved one if they need you, but you're busy, right? And so they need someone who can stimulate them, someone who's literally going to watch over them and help them with all these things. You keeping them home or putting them in front of a television, it just comes back to you with your children. You're not helping them. You think that you're keeping them there and that is your love, but you're not giving them what they need because they need the socialization. They need that stimulation. They need community and they need the medical assistance. All these places are staffed with caregivers, whether it's, certified home health aides, CNAs, nurses, they're there to provide the care. And so that's like just the shift that I wish people would really understand. They're going to flourish and do way better with professionals in a nice community where they can establish friendships and continue to build upon their social skills than they will sitting in your house. And you want to keep them.
I feel like my mother is not, she doesn't need care. She is physically capable and everything. But I tell you what, she needs more socialization. She needs scheduled activities. She needs regular engagement. So even though she's healthy physically, I feel like she's living on her own now. And I can't be all the different things for her and to fill her cup up constantly. And so even feel like there's got I don't know. I feel like there's got to be another option too for
Well, she
maybe
needs like
people.
a retirement community, which I was going to say when I was 24, my grandma moved from up in Illinois down to Georgia to be closer to my mom. And she went into a retirement community. They did have assisted living. They also had a memory care unit, but she didn't need the assistance. But she had a tiny little apartment, a 1-bedroom with a little kitchenette, and they would provide her with breakfast and dinner. And then they had all kinds of activities. Her beauty parlor was down the hall. Then they'd have church services come in for different denominations. And I can remember at the time I was a brand new mother and I went with my mom to go tour places. And I remember asking the lady, I was like, how old do you have to be to move into one of these? And I think she said at the time, 55, which at 24, I thought 55 seems so old. And now that I'm 55 and about to be 56, it just totally freaks me out that I'm like, oh my God, I'm that old now that I could live in it. But I wanted to live in it then because I was like, and somebody would clean her apartment once a week. They would do her sheets and towels and a load of laundry a week or something. And the only thing she had to really worry about was her lunch. And I was like, this sounds like living a dream to me. She had the socialization. So that's what your mom needs, Elizabeth. Is something
Yeah, she does.
be around a bunch of other people. She could go play bridge. She could, play mahjong. She could get her hair done. She could exercise, all that kind of stuff.
So what do you do, Sylvia, though, if you're talking to your parents and they're they're saying they don't need anything? Do you have any tips on how to getting them see maybe, even whether it's someone like my mom that just needs a more active adult community, or if it's time where they're still thinking, so they're not full on memory care center, but they need something more, then you can give, because honestly, I saw one of my best friends last week and she is so beat down right now. Both of her parents were diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they both live with her. She works full time. Her wife works full time. They're overrun, busy, but her parents are like, I'm not moving. I'm not leaving. I'm not going in a facility.
So we hear that all the time. I just had actually one of my good friends come to our house, and we went to see a few other places as well. And he hadn't told his dad. He wanted to wait until after Easter. And then when he told his dad's like a huge guilt trip. Like, what kind of son do I have? I don't even know my son. Like, it's just all the time this happy because no one says, oh my gosh, I can't wait to go to an assisted living. Like, that's just never going to be the reaction. But to your point, I forgot two other really, really important communities, which is independent living, which I think, Erin, that's probably where your grandma. Independent living communities are great because they are attached to an assisted living, but they don't, it's there for like a gradual where they can move in there over time. Okay. And then there's something where the 65 and older, right? So those are more just for people who are 65 and older, but there's no type of assistance provided. So there's something called CCRC, where it's continuing care retirement communities, which it starts with independent living. Then as they gradually need more help, then they go into the assisted living. If there's any dementia, cognitive impairment down the road, then they would go into the memory care. And then if they need true actual like medical intervention 24/7, they have the skilled nursing as well. So there are those communities. Those could be a great introductory. Not all have independent living attached to them, but those are sometimes where people can put their parent first so they get a taste of it. And then they're going to love it because they're going to have their friends, they're going to have their routine. It's all about a routine. Once they get into their routine, they're okay. But it's initially buying into that concept. But there is something called a respite stay, which is what a lot of communities offer, which is, let's say you want to go on vacation and you're caregiving, but you can't, your elderly loved one can't fly with you, can't come along, whatever the reason may be. You can put them in a community for, let's say for the weekend, or let's say for 2 weeks, or sometimes it's some have a minimum 30-day stay where they get to kind of dip their toe and see what it's like. There's two.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, they're
That
called
sounds
respite
perfect.
stays. There's two schools of thought on that, where some communities say, we're going to do away with these because they come in thinking they have one foot out the door. And so they never buy into the concept of staying there.
Yeah.
Where it's not like something you just got to rip off the Band-Aid and say, this is your new home type thing, and you have to adjust. But for others, it's actually worked out really well, where they go in and they're like, oh, okay, this is different. They like the activities. They love the food. Food is such a big thing. Everything is like restaurant style dining, and they end up loving it. So that's something that, to answer your question, sorry, my long-winded answer is respite stays are a method that you could use. You could start by saying, hey, we're going to go away, and sometimes not really go away. We're going to stay here for the weekend or for a week or two, and just see how that goes. That's one way of kind of easing them into it. It's respite stays, or that there is no other option. Like, for example, if it's memory care, you really there's no ifs, ands, or buts around. It's just not safe for them to be there, whether they live with you or they live on their own. You can't have eyes on them 24/7. God forbid they walk out of the house, which happens all the time.
Yes.
They walk out of the house, they're lost and confused, and you can only hope that a first responder finds them and brings them back to you safely. They leave the stove on, another big thing.
So at what point do you think, like, how do you know when it's time to put someone with memory issues into a care facility if they still have their memory a good chunk of the time, but yet they also don't have it a good chunk of the time? Like, is that because I have toured a memory care facility before, and everyone I saw at the facility I toured looked like they were completely out of it.
So I always prepare my families when we're going to tour the memory care, because they're always connected to the assisted living. So you walk through the assisted living and you see everyone having a good time and the activity and the hustle and bustle. All of a sudden, it's like boom, 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 putting codes in, steel doors open, and now you're going into the memory care side. It just creates it just creates that anxiety in the families, and I see it all the time. And the minute they walk in, they're like, no, mom and dad don't belong in here. Because keep in mind, memory care, you can have people in there who potentially are, they call it pleasantly confused, right? And then you can have someone that's really experiencing some type of deeper outburst. And so you have everyone kind of mixed in together, and that makes it difficult. What I will say is, one, it's always a doctor has to make the recommendation if there's an actual Alzheimer's diagnosis, or what the dementia, FTD, whatever it may be. There's all these different sorts of dementia impairments. So it depends on what the recommendation is. But then also what I like to say is even in our care homes and in a lot of assisted livings, there are people with some type of mild cognitive impairment. The reality is it's starting to hit younger and younger, and there's already some type of confusion, some type of getting lost in the moment, forgetting where you are, forgetting what you're doing. And what I always say, as long as the environment can still support them and their needs, then they can continue to stay there. So there's a lot of people with Alzheimer's that can actually probably stay on the assisted living side, right? Where it becomes a more like the line in the sand, like the black and white is if there's any type of violent behaviors and if they're looking to elopement, if they're wandering, if they're looking to constantly leave the building, then they cannot be in the assisted living side. There's a lot of people who have their own cars that those doors come and go, so they can't stay there. And that's normally where the communities make that decision where it's like, okay, we can't, they try to support as much as possible in the assisted living side or residential care home side. But once there's more like those two factors, the behaviors and the elopement becomes an issue, then they would have to go to the memory care, which is the closed in unit.
I was going to say, I see on the news at least once a week where an elderly person has gone eloped, I guess you call it, and they've wandered from their home, and some of them have had really bad outcomes. They've then found the person and they are deceased because they've either fallen down a drainage, like somebody drowned. I mean, and they're usually at home and being cared for by the family. And like you said, when you're an individual, sometimes you have to just contend, I would imagine, with the guilt for putting them in a home. It's almost, I guess I'd rather contend with the guilt of putting them in a home than the guilt of them getting away from my home and something bad happening to them. You're almost sure when you counsel people, you're having to say, this is what could happen with a parent with memory issues. And would you rather have the guilt of like putting them somewhere safe and feeling like, okay, I feel guilty about that than the guilt that they die because they get away from you and get hit by a car or drowned or whatever?
Yes, I had this conversation with my mom and she's like, I'd rather, like, at that point, we're talking about her sister has Alzheimer's and is living with her son, and she just wants to live alone and go home and go to her home in Texas. And right now, she's living with her son in Florida, and she's mad because she wants to go to Texas. And my mom's like, he should just let her go. I'm like, Mom, she literally, like, she goes for walks in the neighborhood and gets lost. She cannot live alone. And my mom, then she gets like kind of ornery with me. And she's like, I'd rather be dead than you force me to live somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, because that might happen if you if you need care and you refuse it. Like, I don't know what to say.
The thing
They get so it's so emotionally charged when you talk to your parents about stuff like this.
The sad reality is that most of the decisions are not done until they're forced to be made. So, for example, I see a lot of families that their parents are fall risk because they're getting weak. Maybe maybe it's not Alzheimer's, but it's just they're just getting to the point where they need help and they don't want to leave their home and they're super stubborn. And again, that delicate conversation. And then from as a child, you're sensitive. Yeah, it's very emotional. It's very difficult. And so you want to preserve their dignity and let them feel like they have as much of a voice in their life. And sadly, sometimes they make the wrong choice. They listen to the parent who really is not at a point anymore to be making those decisions for them. And for example, they're like, oh no, well, we're going to bring a home health aide in for a few hours a day. Medicare will cover that. Okay. But they're not going to be there 24/7. First of all, if they were there 24/7, it would be way more expensive than any community monthly cost. Like that's one. And at some point, they're going to be by themselves. And the sad thing is they're going to fall. That's the biggest thing. They're going to fall. They're going to fall. They're going to end up in a rehab. And all of a sudden, the doctor is going to say they can't go back home safely. And now you're scrambling because they're going to discharge in 21, 23, whatever the days are. Sometimes they say they're discharging next week. And you're like, oh my God, what do I do? And then you start Googling. And then that's when I get the call because now it's an emergency. Mom and dad are going to be discharged. Where do I? And then we start so every family member that I work with, it breaks my heart. They're never in the right headspace. It's a rush. They're about to make a huge financial decision, a huge emotional decision under intense duress because they didn't plan for it. Who wants to plan for this? Who? No one wants to plan for this. No one wants to have these conversations. And so most of the time, again, it only happens when they're forced to do it. What I encourage families is, and I tell my friends, like, you start looking for the signs, right? If you go visit your parents and you notice there's a lot of spoiled food in the fridge, if you start noticing that they're really not paying attention to like their grooming and their hygiene, if you start noticing like the medication, either there's too much of it or too little of it, both are a problem because one, they're not taking or they're double dosing and they're forgetting the medication. Even with the pill boxes, it still happens. If you start noticing hoarding's a big thing. Like they start like a lot of clutter now. The signs are there and we don't want to see them as kids, right? Because it's so hard to see your parent that way. Like it really just breaks your heart, but you have to start. Those are the signs, right? That's when you know it's coming. And that's what I tell. And even so, like sometimes people don't make the decision, like I said, until it's an extreme because it's a hard decision to make. So I get it. Like your mom, so many parents I hear are just stuck. And the sad reality is at some point, the decision is going to be made for you guys, right? And you don't want to get to that point. But it seems like your mom wants to get to that point. She's just at that like, well, that's when I'll go when like I have to. And
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about it just seems like such a massive financial hurdle do you have any tips on that? I mean, when we looked around here, my stepdad fell out of bed, broke his back and his neck. And he was rolled out of bed. He had early onset dementia and then he died within 2 weeks. But before he died, they told us that he was going to have to go into a rehab facility. And so that's when we were like they're like, he'll be discharged within like 20 days, just like you said. And it was full on panic mode here. And we were touring facilities and then we're also looking places that had memory care. He still had his memory, but it was coming and going in and out. And so we were like, we knew he was going to need that as well. And it was like over $10,000 a month. I mean, I'm like, I just don't know how a family can pay for that.
right. So the costs. So on average, the average national cost for assisted living is around like $5,500. So I'll speak in Jersey terms, right? In New Jersey, the average cost is assisted living is $7,500.
She'll come back.
So for memory care, it's an additional like $1,500 to $2,000 above that. And then the nursing home, those start at like $13,000 a month. The difference between the assisted living memory care and then the nursing home is nursing homes can take Medicaid. There has to be, but there's very strict requirements with regards to their assets and their income, right, in order to qualify for Medicaid. Where assisted living, for the most part, is all private pay. However, in the assisted living and memory care, you can private pay for 2 years. A lot of the communities in Jersey have this. And then after you privately pay for 2 years, you can apply for Medicaid. Assuming you can apply for Medicaid, assuming that you meet the requirements. So what happens in a lot of assisted livings is which let's say in Jersey, it's $7,500 average cost, monthly cost of assisted living. You privately pay for 2 years. During that 2 years, we're assuming that you're spending down your assets. Mom or dad have sold their house. We're going to spend down. So then in 2 years, you can meet the Medicaid income and asset requirement to apply for Medicaid. And in the state of New Jersey, all communities are supposed to reserve 10% of their beds for Medicaid. So the issue with that is there's a big waiting list. There's not a guarantee that they'll get the bed. Some communities have sister companies, so they have a bunch of companies in the state so they can leverage one off the other, and that's helpful. Sadly, what I've seen happen to families, which is awful, is that a community, after they spent down their funds for 2 years and privately paid them, said, oh, you know what? Now your loved one has exceeded the level of care that we can provide, and now they'll have to go. Well, now their money's gone. You took their money for 2 years. Now they don't have their leverage anymore. So they can go to the nursing home where they will take them on Medicaid. But I said back to nursing home, your parent might still be at assisted living level. They might not need a nursing home, but now you can't afford that anymore. And you have no choice but to put them in a state mandated Medicaid bed in a nursing home. And so that's what happens. Now, this is why we tell families it's important to start preparing, because there are families that are, protecting their assets way in advance. Whether it's right or wrong, I have seen people in a Medicaid bed having a family member come to see them in a Lamborghini.
Because they transfer assets out of their name so that they don't
they
have
put it
that.
in a Medicaid trust. They put it in a revocable trust. There's attorneys that you could do estate planning, and that basically you can shield your assets that the state would recognize. But you have to do it in a timely fashion, because when you apply for Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back. They're going to look back to 5 years of your bank statement and say, hey, did you sell a house? Where'd that money go? Did you send that to your son? Oh, that's a penalty. So it has to be done there. There's a 5-year look back where that will disqualify you, or that will add times. Like that's why there's like Medicaid advocates that help folks, or attorneys can do it, because there's a whole bunch of rules. But if you can plan for it, because there's two schools of thought on that, right? Like I think what I want to be able to pass it down to my son. One, I have a special needs son. My oldest son is autistic, so I have to have a specialist. Like I need to protect and shield assets for him, right? Where there's other people that say, hey, I worked my whole life. This is my retirement. I'm not giving anything to my kids. I'm going to use it on my, assisted living or long-term care costs. So, two schools of thought. But if you do things properly, families can plan for it. There are other resources. If you were a veteran, there's something called aid and attendance, where in addition to your veteran pension, they will give you a certain amount to you or your spouse for your assisted living costs. Some people do have long-term care insurance. It's extremely expensive, but there is long-term care insurance that will pay to your assisted living costs.
Well, the key with that is you got to get it early. If you get it early in your life, it's not expensive, but you pay for it until you need it. So for all those years, you've been paying for long-term care that, you may pay for 20 or 30 years. But if you try to get it at 60 something, it's going to be way expensive, and you may not be able to qualify for it.
Right. So that's the thing. There's people, again, that have prepared for it, but yes, it is very expensive. I always tell my families, if you can carve out what you think you'll need for those 2 years and maybe put it aside, and then maybe if you want to put the rest, that you want to pass down to your family, do that. That way you give yourself the leverage to be able to have some control about where you go, because that 2 years, you get to choose where you go. And hopefully they do the right thing. And after you privately pay for 2 years, spent down the assets, then you can continue to stay there and Medicaid will pick it up.
Elizabeth mentioned in the intro that you do have a placement service, and then you mentioned about having Medicaid advocates or Medicaid consultants. So tell us about the placement service that you have, how that differs from the actual residential home that you have.
So my placement services, and basically every placement service, is free to families. So I encourage everyone who's in this, like Elizabeth, when you were looking for your stepdad, you could have called a placement service, and we've done the legwork for you, and we're free. We get compensated by the communities that we place into. So if we make a placement into, Fox Trail or a Sunrise or a Brookdale, they will compensate us for the placement or the referral, the finder's fee type thing, right? But depending on who you can have an advocate on your side who's going to, if they're doing the right thing, they're going to loop you in to everyone you need to speak to every step of the way. Like we have the network with the attorneys, we have the network with the Medicare advocates, Medicaid, because Medicare, and then there's Medicaid, and that all gets confusing. Right. And I'm not the expert, but we work with people who can guide families through that.
I didn't know that was I know you did that, but before you, I did not know that was, and I had no idea it was free, your service. I knew you did that because I follow your social media and I knew you talk about it. I missed the part where that was a free service.
Yeah, right. It's free. So, and I've done placements for people, and there's no compensation, because if I place for a Medicaid bed, there's no money, right? But we get all sorts of folks who need placement, and I want to help them, so I know, hey, you can go to this place. It's privately owned. They don't do the 10%. They take more people on for Medicaid. There are people who privately own assisted livings. They're not all equity run with investor groups. Some are just privately family owned businesses for years and years, and they are more likely to help folks in a financial, crisis like that.
Like your facility. So, because you bought the residential home.
So I did.
And
yes.
You've been sharing it. It's a beautiful facility.
Thank you. Yeah, we always wanted to start our own. So we're different because we're only 13 folks. So we are only private pay because we couldn't afford the Medicaid. That's the whole thing. It's all of these smaller care homes are private pay because we don't have enough numbers to justify, because basically when the larger communities, they take 10%, but they have 150 beds, right? So 10% will go to Medicaid because they'll get. So I know, and I feel, because something but I can be flexible with families, but at the same time, if someone tells me this is what I have and I think their funds are going to run out, then I tell them, well, come here. And I help them like, hey, you need to go to an assisted living, a larger community that will allow you to do the 2-year spend down. Some do 18-month spend downs. Again, some really work with them. Some will do 15-month spend downs. I'm like, because if your funds are going to run out, then don't use them here. Let's leverage them where you can go kind of like you're buying into a place. And then after their spend down time frame, they will guarantee you a bed for the rest of the time.
So for our listeners that may be in the position where they're starting to look for maybe either independent, assisted living or memory care or even nursing home, what are like red flags and like green flags when they are going to tour? Like when I remember going with my mom, I mean, I didn't to look for places for my grandma because my grandma was going to be independent living. It wasn't as much of an issue. I mean, she had her full mental faculties, her physical faculties, and we were in town, so we were going to be over there all the time. But when somebody is going and like maybe touring places, doing consultations with these different types of facilities, what would you say are like red flags and green flags that they should look for?
So first of all, every state website has all the inspection reports for all these communities publicly available. You got to go dig and search, but it depends on, like I was looking at Georgia because we were looking at something there and there was the GA something and you have a list of all the communities and you can pull their inspection reports. In Jersey, it's the Department of Health. You go on the Department of Health website and all the facilities are licensed under there. So that's the first step. I would start with that, right? Just look
Okay.
at, see, and are there going to be reports? Of course, everyone complains about it's just like the nature. So you read, you inform yourself and see, what's worth it to you? What are you going to discredit? What are you going to say like, oh, this is important to know, or just keep it in the back of your mind, right? So I always say arm yourself with that. Secondly, when you go in there, I think it's really important. Don't ever get like the chandeliers. I always say like, see past that. Look at the caregivers. See what their demeanor is, right? Are they smiling? Are they engaging the staff? Like that for me is huge. And also, what is the ratio of the caregivers to the actual residents, right? Is it one caregiver for 20 people, 30 people, 40 people? And don't throw in there the receptionist, the gardener, because they can throw in all those personnel and say, oh, okay, it's a much higher ratio. No, what is my caregiver like? How many people are they caregiving for? During the day and at night. You want those two numbers because at nighttime it's wildly different. The staff gets cut in half. So again, these are the things I see, and I'm not saying it's right and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying me as a daughter, that's what would be important to me. Like how many people, if my mom's and their, caregiver is, Sally. Okay, how many people does Sally take care of during the day? And who is caregiving at night and how many people do they have assigned to them? That's the biggest thing. It's really, the care, the most important thing, the cleanliness of the place. That's why I personally, I can't recommend until I've personally gone to the place. It's one thing, the pictures and the videos, but I want to go smell. I want to go see. Does it smell too much like Clorox and bleach? Well, why? Are we hiding something? Like why, it should, granted there's going to be accidents, there's going to be things that happen. It's just the nature of, the demographic, right? But, the cleanliness and the food. What does that look like? You can always ask to taste the food because to me, those are the care, the cleanliness and the food, because I know that would be most important to me.
It just reminds me so much of like it's so funny how the circle of life, I mean,
like daycare,
because doing the daycare when with my first one went to daycare and going and touring daycares, smelling like, does it smell like, just crappy diapers? What kind of food are they feeding them? Are they making home cooked meals? All of the care, how many people are, is the daycare worker, how many kids per room? So it's just so crazy, just the circle of life, how we end up, first we're being taken care of as little children and then we have our years of independence and then we end up kind of back where we started.
And similarly, like what I've got from hearing Sylvia talk is like we care for our children and we do what's best for them, even when they kick and scream and don't want it. That's how we have to look at our parents. And if your parent is insisting on living alone or living in your home, but you're working outside the home, or even if you're not, if you are mentally exhausted, I don't think it is worth us putting ourselves into a distressed state. I mean, And if the situation is not working at home, I think it is beneficial to look outside. So you have to look at what's best for the parent. And it's not good for your parent to be with you if you're stressed all the time around them. And it is better for them. So we really have to.
What a lot of families,
Well,
what we say is just you want to go back to a place where you can be their daughter or just their son, not their caregiver, because your relationship will be incredibly strained. You're going to be fighting with them 24. It's just what happens. And the worst thing I've seen is when the expectation is like their other elderly spouse is taking care of them, because the chances are that the elderly spouse who's taking care of them, the statistic is like 63%. They're 63% more likely to pass away within 4 years than the person they're caregiving for. Like that
Mm,
is the
the
reality. The person who is the
the
caregiver
stress.
gets more sick. And I see a lot of
that's
this.
what I worry about with our generation. If we're caregiving, and I know that at 50, I shouldn't like. I just think if I had an elderly parent living with me that was weighing on me constantly, and if I was always emotionally overloaded with that, I would think that my chances of getting cancer or having a heart attack or would be so much greater
But it is.
because of the stress.
The
For
statistics
sure.
prove. I don't know if you watch. She wrote a book. I went to see her, Bruce Willis's wife, and she was caregiving for him.
Oh,
And she wrote this, and she really put him somewhere when it finally hit her that she could pass away first because of the stress. And she has two little girls, and it was just like, no, like there comes a point where you just have to say, you can't put yourself at risk. And caregivers are putting themselves at risk, financial risk, because a lot of them are quitting their jobs, taking leaves of absence, and they have their own kids. My own sister, like my half sisters, in Georgia, her mom got an Alzheimer's diagnosis. My sister quit her job as an occupational therapist. She still has two kids in high school, and she quit her so that she could take care of her mom. And it was horrible. All they did was fight. And then, long story short, she put her mom in a memory care and she's doing great. It ends up working out. But my sister was run down for months. I'm like, Sen, I'm like so worried about you. And the caregiver becomes someone you really have to start looking at because they get very sick. And the rise for stress, heart attacks in women, it's like it's sort of the biggest killer for us is stress.
and most of the time it's the woman doing the caregiving for the
Mhm.
parent, even for the husband's parent or her partner's parent. So speaking about people quitting their job, I feel like there's a market for, like you were saying, businesses to open up adult daycares on site for certain, like for big companies, like the big companies that can, absorb that kind of cost and just, having the space. But like big companies like maybe Google or, Amazon or whatever, where they have at their corporate headquarters where they could have adult daycares, ones that have like, so they have the little kid daycare and the adult daycare so people can still continue to work. Like you bring your elderly parent with you, you drop them off at daycare, they get fed, they get, some socialization. And then and they get tired, they go for walks or whatever, and then you take them home. I feel like there's got to be a market for that.
Yeah, so it's funny because one of my good friends is this like huge HR director, and she was like, "This is a direction you need to go in," because there's so much emphasis. A lot of the big corporations are extending a lot of resource, especially around mental health, and that's great. They're staying on top of okay, what's important, what's needed, but no one is coming into this because this is coming, this is needed. So many of your workforce is under this intense stress of caregiving because a lot of them are still caregiving, and working at the same time. And there has to be more resources, whether some type of daycare or extending services of placement, like here, speak to these folks, explore your options, estate planning, things that are begin to matter because they're going to be of an emotional and financial impact to your workforce. I don't think that companies are moving quick enough on this, but.
Yeah.
This has been so interesting, and unfortunately so needed. It's one of the topics that our listeners reach out to me privately and ask about the most is like, what do I do? I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know what to do when it comes to my aging parents. And they have more anxiety from their aging parents than they do their teens or young adults. So this was definitely needed. And I just want to give a shout out to you have a blog that's actually super helpful or website, and you've got videos on it and tons of information and all like the the best questions that you ask? Like, what if, you have all the major hot topics. You want to talk about that and how people find you? And
Sure. Yes. I mean, I actually haven't stayed on top of it and I need to because actually opening up the care home like just really consumed me like the last few months, but I'm going to get back onto it because this is new for me. Like I've only been doing this since last summer, right? So as I would learn, I would do a video like, oh, did you hear about this for Medicare or this about Medicaid? Because I didn't know. And I figure most people didn't know either. Yeah. So it's elevateseniorplacement.com is my placement website. And I have a little blog section there. And then we have my Instagram is where I have all the videos. So it's some helpful information about assisted living, memory care, Medicare, Medicaid, like just little facts and tips that I've learned along the way. And I'll continue to add as I learn more because, sadly, it's an ever-changing universe and landscape. Medicare, Medicaid, every year the laws are changing. But please reach out. Happy to answer questions. I mean, I'm based in Jersey and I focus on Jersey, but happy to give like overall general assistance or guidance.
Well, I know this is going to be so helpful to our listeners to have this information and even, just maybe starting to have them start thinking about the planning for their parents, down the road. It's kind of like a funeral. No one wants to think about it. And my grandmother actually, planned her own funeral and did everything ahead of time. So it's super helpful when somebody feels like they are planned. So I'll be sure to share all of your information in the show notes. For our listeners, definitely hit the follow button so that you are in the loop and stay notified each week when we release a new episode. We are super grateful to Sylvia for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
And you can follow Estrogen Dropouts on all the social media platforms, Instagram and TikTok. And you can watch full episodes of our podcast on YouTube. So we will be back next week. Hope y'all have a good one. Thanks.
This has been a production of Estrogen Dropouts, LLC.